We're going to be starting the next talk, which is by Jessica Edwards. Jessica is currently a sophomore at Harvard, where she's concentrating in computer science with a secondary in educational studies. This past summer, she did research over at Johns Hopkins, and that is kind of the basis of the research being presented in this talk. But she's been continuing that research over at Harvard in the Learning, Innovation, and Technology Lab there. At Harvard, she's also involved in the Harvard's Women in Computer Science organization, volunteers at the homeless shelter, and is a member of the Kuumba Singers. So with that, I welcome Jessica Edwards to the stage.
Hi, thank you all for coming out. So I'll be talking a little bit about my research this summer at Johns Hopkins University in their Human Language Technology Center of Excellence. So my talk is called Multilingual Text Search in Image Collection. And so basically, at Johns Hopkins, I participated in their summer program called SCALE, which stands for the Summer Camp for Applied Language Exploration. And so this was a 9 to 10 week program at Johns Hopkins through, as I said, their Human Language Technology Center of Excellence. And so HILTCO, as for short, was founded in January 2007 to focus on speech and language technologies research. And so basically through SCALE, we tackled 2 different programs. So the first problem that we tackled was machine translation. I didn't work specifically on the machine translation side, but for those of you who don't know, basically just translating speech or text to other languages. And so I worked specifically on the optical character recognition team, or OCR for short. And some of the things I worked on more specifically on that team were data and annotations, and as well as text localization. Some of the other things we were trying to tackle on the OCR side of things were also script and language identification, as well as OCR decoding. So basically just trying to see what the actual text in different scene images meant. So to break down text localization within optical character recognition, so basically text localization is just trying to see whether or not there is text in the image, and if there's text in the image, then where is that text located? And so because of this, text localization would be one of the first steps in the OCR pipeline, along with script and language identification. So basically just trying to figure out like what language is in the image that we're looking at, whether that be a fax or some kind of scene like street signs or things like that. So followed by just finding out if there is text in the image through text localization, we do OCR decoding to see like what language that text is in and what that says, and then keyword search. So having the ability to just search through all of these different images, several thousands of images, seeing what image has what specific word. So to do this, we built upon EAST, which stands for an efficient and accurate scene text detector, rather than, for example, Google's Tesseract OCR, which is made more to detect text in like clean images. So like black and white, for example, you have your simple white page with black text. So EAST was built specifically to find images in these scene text, like as you can see in this image here. So like specifically where you wouldn't really be looking for text. And so we built upon EAST, so this simple and powerful pipeline that results in text detection in natural scenes. So some of the improvements we made during SCALE, so our time, these 9 to 10 weeks upon EAST and upon Google Tesseract, we're making it so it's able to grab lines of text instead of words to text. So as you can see, if I go back to this image here, EAST grabs words to text, but our improvements upon EAST grab lines to text so that it makes it easier for the OCR decoder to work. Another improvement we made was based on Google's Tesseract, which, as I said before, wasn't specifically made to grab text in scene text images, but it was made to grab more in like clear-cut images. So I'm not really sure about the improvements on EAST, and that's something that I'll talk about later, is like future improvements of stuff that I would want to learn if I had been researching for more than like 9 to 10 weeks. So now I'll go into a little bit about the different data sets we used. So I mainly worked on the YAML data set, so yet one more deep learning enterprise made another machine learning specific data set made up of 1,000 document images in several different languages, so about 8,000 images total. And so one of the main things I did this summer was augment images in this YAML data set. And besides having the images, they also had annotated CSV files for each images. So these CSV files contain different bounding boxes on all of the images so that you could grab that text and then use that to train in the TensorFlow model. Another data set that we used to see how the trained data actually worked with the model was the SLAM data set. So basically what I did, I augmented images using the YAML data set, and then we would use the SLAM data set to see how the trained model worked on these images. And so the SLAM data set, so the script language annotation for multimedia, was a courtesy of the Center for Advanced Studies of Language at the University of Maryland, and it's also several thousand of images in different languages that we could use to test on these models. So me and other interns this summer worked on the text localization team to do the following. Like, as I said, we really needed more augmented images to really train the model, the EAST model, and make it better for our purposes for finding text and images better. And so what I mainly worked on was finding a need for noise, contrast, out of plane, and general rotation augmented images so that we could train the EAST model. Another intern who I also worked with, I'll be talking about her work a little more, she dealt with synthetic data and used GANs, so generative adversarial networks, which I'll talk about soon, to create more realistic synthetic data. And so to make images that focus more on the noise and contrast problems in the EAST model, I used this open source package called ImageAug, which basically takes several thousand images and provides different augmentations to those. So allowing a range for augmentations to be applied in a large group of images. So here are some of the different augmentations that I had on some of the images. And as I go through the slides, you'll be able to see like how these augmentations affected the images. So some of the augmentations that I used include like sharpen, invert, change color space, etc. So for example, these are some of the images in Farsi. Within the YAML data set, there are about 1,000 images per language. So I randomly went through the ImageAug package and found different images to augment those. As you can see here, they have, for this example, it has a lot of noise. This one, I used changed color space, and it randomly augmented throughout the image, as well as this one. So just basically randomly filter through the package to find different augmentations for these images, and so that we can use these to train the model to have more diversity in the amount of images that is able to pick up on and the text in these images. Here's one in Korean. As you can see, there's some more color space. It was also interesting to see what the package did with noise. For example, having some pixels taken out of this image so that it might be harder for the model to pick up on this text here, and for this one. And for all of these images, we kept the bounding boxes the same so that when it was trained in the model, it was trained with the augmented image and the bounding box from the original image so that it would know that there is still text here despite the augmentation. Here's another one in Russian. As you can see, it's kind of similar. There's some noise here. There's some inversion in the color space. And we have some more color space changes. And then here's another one. So the problem with randomly running the ImageAug package is that you can get images like these which aren't necessarily readable. So if I were to overlay this with truth bounding boxes, I could say that there's text here, but it's not really true because you can't really read it as a person. And so eventually, like, I realized one of my main questions this summer was if I was to augment these images and then say that there is text where an average person couldn't read text there, then how does the model know if that image is readable? And unfortunately, over the 9 to 10 weeks that I was there, just being my first time picking up on machine learning, I wasn't really able to figure out a sort of algorithm to determine whether or not the image is readable or not. I know there are other people in other teams that have determined like how to filter out those unreadable images, and that's something I was interested in learning more about. So another augmentation that I worked on was rotation, and so that was pretty much straightforward, rotating the images. Mainly we worked on 90-degree rotation, so it was mainly just altering the bounding boxes in the CSV file. So that was altering the points in the CSV file listed through column and row. And so basically once I rotated the bounding boxes, you can see, for example, like this image, for some reason, even though the bounding box got onto the rest of the image, it didn't capture this word right here, or like for this box, for example, is also cut off, like another box is also cut off. So that was also something that I would want to make better in the future had I had more time. So now I'll be talking a little bit about generative adversarial networks, which another intern worked on this summer. So basically, she used GANs, which are basically a set of AI algorithms that deal with two neural networks to make synthetic data more realistic. And so here's a little bit about how they work. You start with the latent code and then generate images. Then you have the large data set of real images, which she used in this case, the YAML data set, so the same data set that I had augmented this past summer. And then she randomly inserted the generated images with the real images to find the authenticity of these given images, and then find the probability of authenticity through those images. And so basically, the goal of GANs is to take the synthetic data, overlay that with style images, so like the YAML data set, and to make that a little bit more realistic. And so other uses of GANs include the following. So you can use them for medical anomaly detection, drug sampling for uncurable diseases, image synthesis from segmentation maps, image resolution improvement, and for what we used it for, style transfer on one image to another. And so basically, using GANs, we found this package, Fast Photo Style. So basically, it does what I was saying before. It takes a style image, which for the style image, we use the synthetic data that had been generated on another team this past summer. We have the content image, which came from the YAML data set, so one of the thousands of images that we were trying to use to train the model. And then it results in a stylization result. And so here are some examples of some of the images she generated from this method. So this was using her original smoothing method. And one of the problems with the original smoothing method was that it took up way too much memory. I don't remember how much exactly, but luckily she was able to find a method that simplified it a little more and made it run a lot faster. So here you have the content image, which is structured from some of the synthetic data that another team working on optical character recognition worked on. Here you have the style image, which came from the YAML data set, and then it results in this new image that can also be used to train the model. And here are just a few more examples, so I'll click through those. And these are some examples using the faster smoothing method. You can see that they look pretty similar in comparison to the original smoothing method. And here are some examples using segmentation maps. Yeah, so the other interns and I, we kind of came together at the end of the summer and we talked about some of the work that we would want to do had we had a little bit more time to learn more about machine learning and learn more about the process in general, about OCR and how ML can be applied to that. And so some of the things we talked about were having new synthetic data styles. We kind of felt like the synthetic data that was generated, there could be more variety to that. And so just using fast photo style on a variety of different synthetic data styles would have been good. Just testing more smoothing filters rather than the original smoothing method, and while using segmentation maps, testing the usability of our data, and then what I said before, automatic removal of unreadable images, working on an algorithm to do that. Improving the bounding box rotations, like I said before, some of the bounding boxes were kind of cut off, and I was wondering, like, why did that happen, despite the simplicity of it. And then training our model using our augmentations. We were able to train a TensorFlow model, but we weren't really able to record the results of that and to see how accurate and how much improved the model was because of our augmentations. And so basically that's the end of my presentation. I just wanted to go into a little more depth about some additional human language technology research at Johns Hopkins. So within Johns Hopkins, besides the Human Language Technology Center of Excellence, they also have the Center for Language and Speech Processing. And so I was able to attend a summer workshop there. So researchers and undergraduate, graduate students all over the country attended the 5th Frederick Jelinek, Memorial Summer Workshop. And so these workshops dealt in themes on machine learning for speech language and computer vision technology. And so some of the workshops I attended, including the information retrieval extraction, deep learning, and sentence representation learning. So if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the research, please feel free to ask me. Otherwise, yeah, it was a great experience this summer learning more about machine learning, and this was one of my first experiences dealing with machine learning, so I'm very happy to have been invited to this conference. And I definitely want to get more involved within the machine intelligence community, like during my time at Harvard and beyond. So, thank you.
Great. If you have any questions for Jessica, please feel free to use one of the links up there. So with most of the data that you presented, it was, I guess, more characters that had phonetic significance and oftentimes kind of simplistic or repetitive sort of characters. Did you do any sort of tests on languages like Chinese or Japanese and see what results looked like for that?
So differentiating between the different languages, you mean?
Yeah, just because I would imagine that given sort of the instability of GANs, that generating a wider range of characters, if we have just an alphabet in English, that's relatively easy compared to having to generate a whole lot more characters in other languages is all. So in the case of those languages where you do have a lot more options in terms of character representation, did you see any sort of issues or things with that, or did you get the chance to test on that?
So I didn't personally get to test on that. I know a couple experiments that were on characters like Chinese or Korean, characters that would be a little more wider or a little bit more height, I guess, differential between so I know, for example, some of the characters that were tested, they weren't fully captured in the bounding boxes. So that was definitely an issue going between languages. And so I didn't get to personally test on that, but I know that there's definitely differentiation between on the OCR decoding side of things, and they were trying to differentiate, for example, between Farsi when you're reading left to right, or when you're reading right to left versus left to right, and languages like that. So yeah.
Yeah, and so kind of going off of where you left off in terms of the directionality, did that get to be an issue? Because I saw that you had receipts and stuff, and so the very kind of structure of where that text would be, I would imagine, would get kind of cumbersome.
Yeah, that's definitely an issue, and I think that's one of the main reasons that we wanted to switch from looking at words to text, or looking at lines to text rather than words to text, especially when you're dealing with different languages. So that's kind of one of the main fixes we tried to do for that. But otherwise, yeah, I think there's still a lot of work to be done in regards to differentiating between the languages, and that's why we kind of want to focus on script identification for that, and just once you find the script, then being able to break it down after that.
Okay, yeah. Cool. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I have one more question. I know I talk a lot. I was just wondering if you could repeat the packages that you found useful when you were, playing around with different algorithms and then finding useful packages. And just what came to mind when I was hearing questions was when I first started machine learning and machine intelligence, I found the package like Word2Vec really useful because it turns words and like things that we see as text into like vector representations that a machine, like a computer, can compare. And that's especially useful for languages like Chinese, which have syntactic and semantic similarity, where like if you see the character that means woman, that character appears in the character that means wife, and it appears in mother, and it appears in maternal. Whereas like in English, mistress and wife and girlfriend and woman, they don't all look like each other, but they all mean the same thing. So I found that package really helpful, and I was curious which packages you found helpful too.
Cool, yeah, I'll definitely look at that package. I used, so ImageAug was the one where I did a lot of data augmentation, and then the other intern on my team used Faster Photo Style, so that mainly dealt with GANs, and yeah, overlaying the style image with the content image.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.